И мы приглашаем на сцену модератора сессии Джо Монтгомери.
We invite to the stage the moderator of the session, Joe Montgomery.
Can I wish you a very good afternoon, and I'm delighted that we have such a large audience for this final exciting session of this afternoon's discussion. My name is Joe Montgomery. I'm Chief Executive for the Urban Land Institute across Europe. We are a network of real estate investors and developers, so one of my special interests is the role that the marketplace can play in promoting decentralized urban development. Can I firstly, though, say that this session revolves around the role of municipal authorities, the role that powerful, innovative cities can play, city leadership can play, in fostering and promoting good quality development. We have 3 world cities to discuss, to learn from this afternoon. Those cities are London, Mumbai, and of course our host city, Moscow. So can I welcome to the stage from London, Sir Edward Lister, the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Chief of Staff to the Mayor. Could you welcome Sir Edward Lister? Could you welcome Adusumilli from Mumbai, who is the Metropolitan Regional Development Authority head in India, and your own Natalia Sergunina, Deputy Mayor for Economic Policy, Land and Property. Welcome them to the stage, please. So, of course, these 3 very dynamic cities with job growth and economic vitality all enjoy what I think we call the problems of success. With their economic dynamism come real challenges that need to be resolved, and resolved creatively through innovative policy and through clever incentives. The challenge of decentralized urban development isn't just a technical one. It requires true commitment to high environmental standards, so the way we decontaminate in former industrial land will be crucial. Often questions of governance are raised because sometimes you're dealing across various local authority boundaries. Often there's a question of financial viability and the financial engineering, because of course one of the things we'd like to invite in is a public-private partnership so that the cost risks are shared. And then finally, there's a very real challenge about how we make these new areas outside of the centre attractive as places for people to live, to work, or to do business. So if that's our range for this afternoon's session, I'd like to welcome Sir Edward Lister to set out the London perspective on some of these challenges, and then we'll have the Mumbai perspective, then the home perspective, and then I'd really like to generate some discussion with you. So please think of questions, and we'll see what kind of discussion we can generate. Sir Edward, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity of coming along this afternoon and talking about some of the challenges as we see them. And I'm going to go through some slides very quickly because I want to spend quite a bit of time on some of the end slides rather than the whole set. But for us, we had a great success last year with the Olympics, and that proved to us that big events can be a major attraction to the city and a great way of making sure that we bring a lot of life and people into it. But what are our challenges? Our challenges as a city is 1 million more people in the next 10 years and a shortage of affordable homes. And on this particular one, I just want to put it up really just to show the importance of a city. In our particular case, we've looked at the GVA, and I'm just trying to make the point that the London economy is actually bigger than the economies of countries like Belgium or Switzerland or Sweden or Austria. So it just shows you what a driver a big city is. And I think it's always worth bearing that in mind, because the big cities are the drivers of the national economies. And there is this quote, which I hope you can read, but the point I wanted to make is that cities are about innovation. And if cities do not innovate, they decline. So cities are always about change and about moving forward and about developing. And if you fail to do that, then there is a price that has to be paid. And one has to do it in a number of ways. One has to signal that one is intending to stay as a leading global city. Why you have to invest in the infrastructure of a city. And the investments are enormous. And there has to be a route map for the stakeholders. They've got to know where the city's going. What is it trying to achieve? And it's also about announcing that you're open for business. So we developed a series of plans of action. And these were, firstly, in transport. And there's been a lot of talk about transport today. But for us, it's about increasing our transport infrastructure by 30%. It's about trying to get more trains on our metro system so that we get them every 2 minutes. It's about building new crossings across our river. And it's about trying to do what Moscow has so successfully done, sort out our aviation problems. And I think we just wish we were as far ahead as Moscow in that. It's also about the quality of life. And I think that this is one of the most important messages of all. London, like Moscow, are old cities. But they were built at a time when people recognised there had to be high quality of life, and we are having to all adapt and make sure we continue to develop this. And it's about simple things like trees, making sure that we constantly have a city which is greener, more pleasant than it was before, more parks, more open spaces, that we're cleaning up our air, we're cleaning up our water. And all of this whole making the city a nicer place. And that's absolutely key for investment, because one of the studies we've done shows that one of the reasons people invest and want to live in the city is, in fact, these soft areas, the parks, the open spaces. They're major economic drivers. It's about our biggest challenge, which is about housing and land. For us, we need to double our housing production, which is a very, very difficult thing to achieve. We've got to actually now create more housing today than we've ever done in the last 50 years. So that actually shows you gives you some idea of the challenge that we face. It's about extracting all the land that we can from government, because government is, in our case, a big landowner, and we need that land for development. it's about finding new ways of people to own their own home or rent their home, new funding models that make it easier for them, and new funding models which encourage developers to build more. It's also about standing up for the big city. One of the biggest difficulties we have, and I can't believe it's any different here in Moscow or indeed any other great city in the world, is that the rest of the country looks at that city and says, why are you spending all that money there? You need to spread that money elsewhere. But the truth is that the big city drives the economy of the whole country. And an example, a very small example that I would give, is that we have in London, we have a bus which is very London. It's a double-decker, two-storey bus, and it's red. And we decided to build a new one, and we actually manufacture those in Northern Ireland. We've now got the largest private sector manufacturing plant in Northern Ireland is producing its goods for London. And it's just an example that if you invest in the capital city, you end up investing elsewhere in the country. And that's a very important message. And the other message is that if you're investing and you're building that infrastructure, you need sources of finance which are long-term and consistent. Because if you're borrowing very large sums of money to build, you need to make sure you have an income stream that is constant. This is a tension in London, certainly, between London government and national government. And it's all about making sure you have that consistency. And it's about ambition. It's about making sure in international competitiveness we have the skills that people want, that we are training people adequately to meet the demands of the 21st century. For us, for example, our tech area, our tech industries, in the last few years now employ over 40,000 people. That's 40,000 very highly trained, highly qualified people in the tech industry who understand what they're doing. These are skills which are in short supply and are skills that can go anywhere in the world because they are so short. So it is about making sure you're constantly training and constantly creating those opportunities. And you can use the same arguments in all the sciences because it is in those areas that there are great opportunities, and the same in high-end manufacturing, which again is highly, highly skilled. But cities are not just about buildings. They're also about policing. It's about making sure people feel safe, and it's about cutting crime, which are big issues for us. It's about making sure that the life chances of children in our poorer areas can be the same as they are in the richer areas. One of the awful statistics in London is as you go east, your life chance decreases by about a year a station on the metro line because we are so much weighted with our wealth to the west and not to the east, and we need to correct those things. So, what is our focus? Well, our focus is all about new opportunity areas, about areas that will create the jobs and the housing that we need. And we've looked very closely at a whole series of opportunity areas. These are parts of our city where, for what reason or another, The industry has left them. They are no longer as viable as they were. They are low density. So it is about creating density and creating opportunities. And although our map won't mean much to a lot of people, it gives you an idea of the areas that we think we can grow and expand and get the kind of growth that we want. But to the east of us, we also need the advantages of new port facilities, which are now built. We are working hard to get a new airport, and it's about new river crossings, new roads, new rail, and this is very much our growth area. And then I put this slide in because it's also about railways and our ambition for railways. And it doesn't look much, a few lines on a map, but we are talking about, and I can't do this into rubles, my maths aren't up to it, but in dollars, you're looking at about $20 to $25 billion in expenditure. And that gives you some idea of the kind of cost base you've got to work on if you're building the sort of infrastructure a big city needs. And this is a new railway line going from the southwest to the northeast of the city, and is designed purely to drive a train service through that area every 2 minutes. So, what are we doing? Well, we firstly have an infrastructure investment plan, which we're working on and developing further, which will put a price tag on everything that we need and how we're going to fund it. And that's about capturing land value. As you put in new infrastructure, how do you skim off the top the extra, some of that profit that exists to help pay for the infrastructure? It's about not just transport, but energy, homes, commercial development, schools, everything that's in the thing. And it's also about challenging how you do things at the moment. We are constantly having to challenge the way in which we've done things in the past, because the way we did them in the past may not be open to us anymore. We are now having to raise money by very different and very innovative means, and those are creating challenges for a city. So that's our list of our longer term challenges, and I hope I've gone through this rather quickly, but I hope it gives you a flavour of the sort of challenges we feel we have in our city. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sir Edward. And now I think we should turn to a rather different kind of city with different challenges and its own solutions. And if we could invite you, Adusumilli, to come and talk to us about the Mumbai experience.
I am going to talk about the experience of Mumbai Metropolitan region, which is 10 times larger than the city of Mumbai, and the approaches that we adopted in this region to create new centers of attraction. They are not necessarily the newly attractive areas, but they are also caused by necessity to decongest the existing city of Mumbai. The approaches that were adopted in Mumbai are creation of planning and institutional mechanisms for creation of metropolitan region, to plan for it and to develop the metropolitan region. I will come back to how it was done later. And reorganization of office sector jobs in the city of Mumbai. They were diversified and dispersed into the rest of the areas. And deconcentration of industries as well. And also shifting of wholesale markets from the center of the city to outside the city. and creation of a lot of transport terminals at the peripheries of Mumbai initially, and actually now planning to be shifted into outside Mumbai, and land assembling mechanisms to make all the above possible. There were different approaches to land assembly adopted, and some of them were very useful and attractive. I will discuss that. And there are a lot of city-wise redevelopments that are going on in the city of Mumbai. These are redevelopments of slums and redevelopment of dilapidated and old structures, redevelopment of a lot of governmental housing and commercial stock. That includes municipal offices, that includes municipal staff quarters, government employees quarters, and police stations. It also includes bus stations, bus shelters and bus stations, and also municipal markets where they sell vegetables and fish and etc. All of them are undergoing significant redevelopment initiatives. And creation of frameworks in the metropolitan regional context is where you can see on the right a graphic which shows out of two large districts which are close to the city of Mumbai. Mumbai was that tip. I can't point it out to you, but at the tip of the little island part that you can see where Mumbai is written, the southern tip of that was the center of Mumbai earlier, even though it's not at the geographical center. That was called South Mumbai. That was originally the city of Mumbai, and which consisted of port, the very important port in the economy of Mumbai, the industries, the stock exchanges, and the entire office sector jobs and the seat of government were all located in this part of the city. And when the regional expansion was to happen, one of the first exercises that happened was to delineate this region. And the criteria used to delineate this region was to initially create a planning framework. So the state of Maharashtra, of which Mumbai is the capital city, has come out with a Regional and Town Planning Act in the year of 1966, which created a legal framework for creation of regions, and Mumbai Metropolitan region was delineated on the basis of that. And the criteria used was the distance that one can travel in a day and come back from office job, and also nearby areas which were showing significant amount of urbanization. And an institutional framework was created. An institution was created called Mumbai Metropolitan Region Development Authority, which I today represent. This institution was created to actually create a plan and realize the plan for this region. And the effects of all this has been, in the last 40 years, the contribution of Mumbai to the population of the region has reduced from 75% to about 55%, which is expected to go down to less than 50% in the next 1 decade. And you can see the spatial organization of structures on the little graph there. That's where settlements are located currently within the region. And the approaches adopted also included reorganization of office sector jobs. This meant all the jobs sitting in the South Mumbai tip should be expanded to the north of Mumbai as well as outside Mumbai in the rest of the region. So one of the red dot indicates the area to which from blue the office jobs were shifted. That's created as the new commercial district, central business district. This was a marshland, and it was in an environmentally sustainable manner. It was reclaimed. Stormwater drainage was reorganized in this area, and that whole piece of land, which was in government ownership, was now used as a immensely potential area from which institutional finance can be raised. So this piece of land is given to this authority called Metropolitan Development Authority, which actually use sale of land in this area to get revenues to immensely finance the infrastructure in the entire region. So this was seen as a very successful story in South Asia. And parallelly, a new town called New Bombay, which is currently known as Navi Mumbai, is created. On the right side graphic, you can see that in terms of scale, it is equivalent to Mumbai in size, and it is just across little creek in between. So Bombay and New Bombay actually look at each other, and there are now 2 bridges connecting both of them, and 2 more bridges are planned across the creeks, and that makes Mumbai and New Mumbai very complementary to each other. So this was the environment first created, after which the shifting of activities started happening, industrial and markets. And the decentralization of industries was a policy at the state level. And as part of that state level decentralization policy, industries in Mumbai were shifted to outside Mumbai, including to the Navi Mumbai area. But this happened in a very legislative kind of environment where industrial location policy was put in place for the metropolitan region, and all the industries were classified on the basis of their environmental pollution criteria, and those which will be heavily polluting were not any longer allowed in the main cities in the region. And they are dispersed to the rest of the region in an environment where their effluent can be treated well, and where they are under the control of another state level institution. And shifting of wholesale markets also immensely released the lands in South Mumbai. There were steel markets, there were vegetable markets, fruit markets, and other kinds of markets which were sitting, occupying land in South Mumbai. They were all shifted to New Bombay subsequently. And that took almost 15 years to actually convince the marketeers to go there. But even though it took 15 years, it has happened in an extremely organized manner, and today they're all happy operating from that area. And creation of lot of transport terminals also happened. And land assembly for creation of new CBDs and the new town of New Bombay, land was completely acquired by the government from private owners, and if it was previously government lands, the lands were transferred to the newly created institutions in the government sector, which were responsible for planning and development of these new areas. So it was seen as a very useful tool, not only from the point of view that you have larger control on land use in a new town owned by the government, but also where the efficient policies of land development and land disposal can realize to the government substantial amounts of revenue, which can then be used for financing the infrastructure and housing. And there are a lot of other greenfield areas in the region which are being now triggered by the name of growth centers, where large scale areas are being identified, but government's intervention may be limited to a very small portion within that, a core area which can be acquired because it's no longer feasible financially and politically to acquire private lands in India. In fact, this year India has seen a significant legislation called Rehabilitation, Land Acquisition and Rehabilitation Act, which is modified after 125 years. This act now makes it almost impossible for the government to acquire lands for any public purpose. The amount of rehabilitation involved and the compensation to be given to private landowners is immense in this case. So in view of this scenario, the new experiments will be based on negotiating with private landowners. Some kind of land sharing and benefit sharing, revenue sharing are the new examples for land assembly that are emerging. And a lot of special economic zones were planned in the region on similar lines of what was happening in China, but through private sector here. But I must confess that they did not meet with great success. The issue, and while all these are seen as new examples that worked to a great extent, except the special economic zones, there were a lot of issues that arose out of these. One is the government's commitments kept moving, they kept shifting. When Navi Mumbai new town was created, the government agreed to shift its own seat from Mumbai to Navi Mumbai. That's the assembly of the state was to shift, but then the state never later politically agreed to do that. So a lot of commitments were not fulfilled from the government sector, but the cities were made to be a bit more resilient to turn around and still be able to survive around this situation. And then traditional instruments like land assembly, as I said, in public sector is no longer easy. And government institutions, for example, my institution plays the role of a planning institution, acts as a regulatory institution. It permits all developments within the region. And it also acts as a land developer because we own substantial amounts of lands. So the roles, while we wear the three different hats, our attitude becomes very different. So at times they conflict with each other's interests. As a land developer, we would like to have the land values the highest, so that the money can be high money can be realized from it. Whereas as a planning institution, we should be aiming at actually bringing down all the land costs so that land becomes affordable to people. then through the redevelopments and the greenfield developments, a lot of private sector involvement was envisaged, and a lot of incentive mechanisms were introduced in the city of Mumbai. For example, to put it briefly, if I have a development potential of building 100 square meters on a 100 square meter plot, to get private sector involved in doing redevelopments for slums and dilapidated buildings at no cost to the original residents, the development potential was, instead of 100 square meters, it became 400 square meters on the same piece of land. So the developer was asked to give free of cost some housing to the original resident there, and keep the rest of the thing to cross-subsidize the first part as well as make some profit. So this orientation was looking very rosy to the political system, and therefore it was adopted so overly. For every problem that arose in Mumbai, the answer was seen as giving additional construction potential to the private developers, and this has gone too far. That's what is the professional opinion in the city, and it has gone to the extent that it may be a self-killing mechanism in future. And it also gave rise to unacceptable densities, because if there are 100 residents on a piece of land originally, now there are 400 residents through redevelopment. So it gave rise to a lot of density, redensification of the areas. And planning instruments of additional construction, transferring the development rights from one parcel of land to the other, that's what we mean TDR, transferable development rights. All these planning instruments, which are very innovatively introduced in early 90s, are now seen as instruments to raising revenue by the government for various reasons. So that planning instrument is becoming a revenue-raising, milking kind of instrument. So that might lead to a lot of problems in future. That's it. You had some key questions. I can answer them later. Yeah, later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uma. Fascinating perspective from a different kind of city. But it gives me real pleasure to invite Natalia Sergunina to give us the host city perspective, and then we'll start to have some discussion.
Everything that has been said prior to this, every premise or thesis has a life to live. Each one of them also has a dilemma to face. In particular, who works in Moscow, they know that in the past years we put things in order with regard to the cost of land and cost of land lots. But the situation that we have today, first of all, we have the enterprises that are involved in the real sector, production sector. They begin to speak about leaving the city, about relieving their industrial areas, industrial zones, and the issue: who do we have to stimulate in this particular industrial production, or in this situation that we found ourselves in, it is more profitable to use the land resources that whatever developer projects could apply to them. The dilemma, what could be done with the territories that at present are industrial areas, is not only it's a problem of all the big megalopolises, and as far as we are concerned, it is very important to find a balance between the highly profitable housing construction of the territories that have been vacated and the creation of highly skilled jobs, because in both cases, these residents of the city are interested. If we build housing, then potentially it will be intended for the residents in Moscow. If we create jobs, it is also for the residents of Moscow. And I understand that our today's discussion and our today's experience that we can share will enable us to find the balance, to strike the balance between stimulating and banning or forbidding measures, prohibited measures that the city as an administrator can utilize or apply in order to, on the one hand, highly expensive pieces of land could be used more effectively, and the other not to use the potential that we have in our industrial enterprises. Certainly, one of our objectives is to improve the economic activity in terms of collection of taxes and other fees. Any enterprise that leaves the city is that we lose taxes, as you would also appreciate. And in the time, if we build housing in this area, that's an additional source of resources. So we can't find any linear resources. We have to look at the complex development of various wards, and we have to strike a balance, or try to strike a balance between the possibilities for us to live and creation of jobs. Take into account that the territory, which has become additional territory of Moscow, the increment in the south east of Moscow, they are aimed at southwest of Moscow. They are aimed at the housing construction that already had been planned will also be supported by the transportation system and also balanced by the respective jobs that are to be created in those areas. Under such conditions, when we ourselves find ourselves in the internal discussion as to what is our priority, it is difficult for us to predict how we can attract investments. It is for that reason that the most important thing for us is to develop a master plan for the city development, which will take into account all the interests that I have referred to, where our industrial zones could be points of growth, as we saw at that exhibition in the South Port, for example, which is a very vivid example of that. On the other hand, the same sleeping quarters, if you can refer to them as such, they still have a lot of territories, so that additional jobs could be created in those areas. The issue of the balance is very much an issue of our joint work that the city administration and the city residents have to sort of cooperate in, but still we have a dilemma to overcome. For example, today we came back to the issue of that the construction of cords in the city is the correct thing to do, because they will contribute to the proper development, minimize the pendulum movements of citizens. In the meantime, I, as a person who live very close to where this court has been built, I would very much against such a court construction. And the same thing applies to the metro construction. For those for whom it is remote and they have an opportunity today to use metro in full, and those people who live near the construction site where the quality of life changes because they have a new transportation terminal, that's the issue of their comfort, which has to suffer. And so the balance of comfort between the global interests and the citizens or residents whose interests are touched on by various decisions, it's a very difficult balance that you have to achieve. And the experience that such cities as London, Mumbai, or any other cities have passed through, the experience they have gained, it goes to show that unfortunately the populist decision cannot be really popular, because many decisions, the final, eventually, or the bottom line is they can be negative for some people. You need to have a distinct and clear strategy of urban development, and what we have today, what we heard today, only stands testimony to that. Thank you very much for your attention to my presentation.
Deputy Mayor, it's very clear. I've tried to listen quite carefully over the last couple of minutes, and I think Sir Edward Lister talked about London in terms of the need for innovation and adaptation. He spoke about the centrality of the quality of life that the city can offer. He talked about the need to double London's production of housing. He talked about retaining the right skills and the creation of a set of opportunity areas to make sure that this new development could be fostered easily in those locations. He talked about the city's investment plan for infrastructure. He spoke quite interestingly about a notion called value capture financing, where you try to get some new creative ways of getting the private sector to share in the cost of some of this development. And he talked about the creation of a new central business district. Chief Planner Uma from Mumbai spoke about the location of her city within the Metropolitan region. She spoke about the strategic redeployment of both markets and Mumbai's central business district. She talked about the creation of new capable agencies, special purpose vehicles, to assemble land, to create special planning zones, and to be I think she more or less said, a navigational aid so that developers could get rapid decision making. And she talked about that crucial issue of checks and balances for the private sector to make sure that there wasn't an over-provision in any particular sector. And that theme was also taken up by Madam Deputy Mayor from your host city here in Moscow. She spoke particularly about the need to create an intelligent balance between an overdevelopment potential for housing on the one hand or workspace on the other. And if I'm summarizing unfairly, correct me, Madam Mayor, but I thought you were saying, in essence, homes without jobs is not a great result, but jobs without homes is not an acceptable result either. So I think the three themes that emerge from all of this are about each city's strategy for arriving at the correct, appropriate balance between density and sprawl. Both talked about the need for infrastructure as an enabling feature of urban development and the role of housing, crucially, in creating these new urban development zones away from the center. So if that's my very amateur summary of what we've just heard from these three world cities, I wonder what questions this provokes in your mind. And if you have a question, I'm sure there are microphones around the place. There are standing mics here at the front. Don't be shy. Come and say who you are and ask your question.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, Gleb Korineev, Company Strategy Partners, and I have the question of the following kind. What alternative ideas to develop industrial areas are considered in Moscow and were considered in other cities before creating housing or industrial sites? I wonder if alternative solutions are taken into account to have a comprehensive, let's say, site for our technological institutions which require additional space for laboratories. At the same time, the industrial sites, they experience shortage of qualified personnel. I wonder if there are some alternatives in Moscow on that kind of thing.
Sponsors.
Thank you, Daryl Stanford, Urban Land Institute. My question is regarding Mumbai. The center of all the offices were moved from Old Mumbai to Navi Mumbai. I'm curious, over what period of time did that take place? The population, the workers that were working in the old areas, where were they living at the time, and how did they shift their commute from the old Mumbai to the new Mumbai? And the whole transportation infrastructure, how was that all developed to support that shift? Thank you.
Okay, so again, my amateur summary is for policymakers, it's a well-known fact that every option is suboptimal. You never make the right decision. There's always somebody's interests that are slightly constrained. But within these difficult policy choices, how can you justify relocating your office base to another part of the city, and what are the downstream consequences of that, and who bears those consequences, and what kind of options analysis went into some of the choices that were made here in Moscow, given that every choice has an upside and a downside. Uma, do you want to start, and then Madam Deputy Mayor? Yes.
Sorry.
I would answer the second question because the first one was specifically, I guess, aimed at Madam. Regarding shifting of office jobs from Mumbai to Navi Mumbai, it was not about actually shifting the existing jobs. It's part of larger restructuring of office sector jobs within the metropolitan region, and therefore no new jobs were allowed to be created in South Mumbai thereafter. All the new jobs that were created in the office sector were to move towards the new CBD as well as towards the new town of New Bombay. So that's how a new CBD was created at a place called Bandra, which anybody who knows Mumbai will know that, and in New Bombay. So it's new migrants who were coming for highly skilled jobs to the city of Mumbai would not anymore go to Mumbai, but they would go to these new centers. So there was no compulsory shifting of any jobs that happened. But in terms of wholesale markets, it happened. The markets were closed by an act of law, and they were asked to operate from a different part of the region. So this new creation of newly created office jobs required some associated tertiary government sector few offices to expand to the new city. So that expansion also required some old people to be moved there. So government offered substantial incentives for anybody who would like to move to New Bombay, new city, by creation of a lot of governmental housing stock there, and offered it a very cheap price on purchase basis to anybody who was willing to buy. And in terms of wholesale markets, anybody who shifted for the purpose of wholesale market, that included wholesale merchants, retail merchants who would sit there. Even the guy who sells tea in the wholesale market was offered a house at a very subsidized price in the new city. And when the new city was created, water transport mechanisms, bus transport mechanisms were introduced right in the beginning, and suburban rail was extended 20 years later. That took some time to finance. So the transportation links were created subsequently. But initially, the whole package of housing, jobs, police stations, telephone exchanges, schools and hospitals and markets were created together in the new town. Therefore, people who had to move there for jobs didn't actually have to come back to Mumbai for other purposes.
Okay. Madam Deputy Mayor.
Я бы хотела сначала ответить вот.
I would like to answer the second question concerning Mumbai. And in Moscow, you know, there is no territory. And when it was integrated into Moscow, there are certain approvals received on construction of living quarters and housing. And no jobs were envisaged. And how to stimulate the construction of office space there, and also creation of some skilled jobs on new territories. And at present, we proceed from the fact that as of January 1st, 2014, a new rule is going to be implemented. That is the estimation of tax on real estate from the Kadarst value. And economic stimulation of moving such working places where we have already housing, we don't see it at that time. And now the government of Moscow is trying to find the approach how, by using taxation system, to stimulate construction of new jobs at those integrated areas. And what other alternatives other than housing or industrial zones we have? Moscow, in our opinion, it's an innovative city. And the number of technopolises or technoparks or other entities, innovative specialized points of growth, make it possible to offer jobs to local population and also to those who migrate. As those issues relevant to training, so the government of Moscow is developing the following program when we offer the employer certain subsidies where he can order some specific program to be trained. And if we feel that there is a necessity, like a restaurant, and to a certain extent, it also requires certain skilled individuals. But what kind of quality of the training do we have? We're trying to find an answer by the dialogue with the employer, by giving him specific subsidies so he could pay for the training of the specialists this business requires. And this balanced approach, when we are training the personnel who are not leaving us, but who are really in need, for some employers will make it possible even to move to a higher level of trainings and to those universities and training institutions which would be interested in receiving these subsidies and training of the personnel which will be in demand on the market in Moscow.
First, and then the gentleman behind.
Вопрос к сэру Эндуру Литтеру. Значит, в докладе
In this report, it was said that the problems of London development, what was in the past, wouldn't be possible in the future. And the second thing, a new way to raise money. And what is the difference for development, for engineering infrastructure for the city is differing from the method you used in the past?
And then the gentleman, please.
The question is for all experts, therefore I will be speaking in English. Gleb Zeitlin, Territory Development Institute. There is a number of people, a kind of social group, maybe not very big social group, of people at Moscow and the other cities that would be really happy to relocate outside the cities. So it's a kind of deurbanization process. And these people would like to live outside the city, but nothing alternatives except for agricultural sector in the rural territory creates very low level of wages in the rural areas, and therefore what kind of strategies could be applied for creating such kind of communities, so maybe little cities, little villages with people who are able to work there and would like to live there and achieve a good level of life and comfortable level of life.
Okay, so I took there to be points here about what kind of opportunities and incentives are there for people to earn good salaries outside the centre, and an invitation to say a little bit more about the innovative financing mechanisms for infrastructure here in Moscow, but elsewhere too. I know, Sir Edward, I'm going to reveal a conversation I had with Sir Edward just before we came in. You were talking to me about the new employee profile for some jobs created on the edge of London. I don't know whether you'd want to share a London perspective on the kind of jobs that exist outside the centre, and then we'll hear the Moscow and the Mumbai perspective.
Sorry, help if I turned it on. Dealing with that second point, we have an experience at the moment where we have a new port which has just been completed. And the decision was taken to entirely retrain everybody that was going to be employed in the port, because it was going to be much more high-tech and was going to be a very different type of operation. The lessons from that are quite interesting. This is a port now employing 2,500 people, yet the wage levels are good levels. They are attractive. They're creating a lot of employment in what is a relatively rural area on the edge of the city. But what's also interesting is it's creating retraining opportunities. For example, the senior crane operator, these are big container cranes, was a beautician from Southend-on-Sea who was retrained as a crane operator, earning about 3 times the salary she earned before. It's just interesting. It's a new way of doing things. It's all about training. It's about opportunity. And I think that's the positive. On the other question, if I could just comment on that, new forms of finance. From a London perspective, our experience in the past for infrastructure was that it was largely paid for by the city government or by central government. Those opportunities are disappearing. Central government no longer has the money, and local government has to find new ways of raising it. So what we're trying to do is look at ways in which we can take some of the uplift in values. An example, we are building a railway line in one corner of London where we have a cost of just over £1 billion. That's about $1.5 billion. That is being paid for by 2 things. Firstly, we're capturing the increase in business occupation and the taxation that they normally pay for their land. And we're secondly have a levy on all residential developments in the area. Because what we've done is we've traded density for transport, and therefore we're looking for the developers to contribute towards that. And in short, we are funding the entire railway line out of the private sector. And those are examples of new ways of financing things, different ways of financing things.
Madam Deputy Mayor.
Я бы хотела, наверное,
I would like to respond to the second question. I wonder if it was addressed to Moscow, but I believe that the Russian citizens, they know a saying. So there is lies, truth, and statistics. And as far as those who would like to leave Moscow and escape from Moscow, now we have only the growth of the population. That's number one thing. And now let's talk a standard situation. A 3-room flat, which is adjacent to the ring road. It's approximately $500,000, depending on the type of the house. And now let's see what could we do for $500,000 beyond the territory of Moscow. You could buy a household or to organize some activity, and those who have a wish to leave Moscow, to escape from the city and become rural citizens, so the assets they could develop from sales of Moscow real estate would afford them to do that.
By perspective on innovative financing, does your city pay for everything itself, or have you had to design new ways of financing some of this?
The new infrastructure financing is largely happening sectorally, of course, but largely happening by means of public-private partnerships, especially the transportation sector, and slowly it is moving to solid waste management and also water resource development, that's construction of dams, etc. That's happening on the basis of public-private partnerships. So cities are able to leverage their negotiating strengths and the structuring of PPP kind of projects to actually bring in a lot of infrastructure interests into these fields. And in terms of building the capacities of the municipalities themselves to finance certain sectors in which private sector is not interested, a lot of borrowing by municipalities is happening in India. This requires the provincial level, state level government's approval, depending on their own financial strengths. But borrowing has become a very common phenomenon. For example, my own office as a regional institution has lent about $1 billion worth of money to the local municipalities so far to build their capacities, to leverage their smaller capital expenditure strengths to actually deliver a lot more capital expenditure. And the experience of municipalities behaving in terms of loan repayments has been extremely positive. And in terms of jobs moving to areas outside, the Indian experience has been wherever new towns are being created, the locations are being carefully chosen to make sure that there is some economic strength in that region, and further investments convert that economic strength into job creation in that area. And jobs and social and physical infrastructure are considered as key elements to actually make people move to that area. So the new town experiments in greenfield area development experiments around Mumbai have been that investments are made first to realize the economic potential of the area through industries, ports and office sector jobs, and secondly to invest in housing by the government initially. And the governments have invested in creation of telephone exchanges, police stations, schools, hospitals, markets, shopping complexes and parks and everything. And initially, in fact, to make people move to that area, government agencies, the new town development agencies offered the salaries of all these government offices. They actually paid the salaries of police stations and telephone exchanges, etc., over a period of 3 to 5 years to let those employees move to that area. And then slowly, once the cities started taking shape, these benefits were withdrawn. So it was kind of a combined effort to shift population with jobs. Thank you.
Fascinating incentive package. So, very final questions, ever so quickly. I hope you're not shy, because there is no mic, and you're going to have to join this gentleman by coming up to the front here. Would you mind? Sir, do you want to ask the first question? Very quick, and then we'll try and invite some very rapid answers, and then we'll try and close.
Джо, спасибо за лояльную модерацию.
Thank you for such moderation. I never thought that I could be standing on the same podium with you. It's a great honor for me. And I am responsible for Moscow Duma, land use and so on. But the first question is to Edward Liss. In the past years, you realized a great number of questionable problems and major programs, and they became successful. To have a universal mechanism that is from the initial coordination of interests of the land owners, because the institution of property is very well developed, probably the best developed throughout the world, very serious. What can you say about that? And the second question, which is linked to it, to Natalia, the city should not be made of rubber, kind of, and talking about the jobs, so we understand that the taxes on property and on land will eventually bring about a situation when business in developing industrial zones will be compelled to increase its margin by creating cheap jobs. And do you think that in this balance you have to be to carry out a serious study so that the structure of jobs would indeed be attractive for the residents? Alexandra Andreeva.
Moscow, the question is the following. Nowadays, in Moscow and Moscow region, there are 20 million people living, and in the whole country, 140 million living. And the number of population in Russia falls, and the population of Moscow and Moscow region grows. So we have a problem for the whole country. We have over-concentrated population in one small area and deserting country. It's really dangerous for the nation and for the country. And in Moscow, people are against new building because it influences their life and influences very badly. And there is a proposition to forbid new building in Moscow and nearly forbid new building in Moscow area, to force builders go outside Moscow area, it will help to it will help other areas. It will take. It will let people live and stay living there. And the question is, what does I think representative of Moscow authorities? What does she think about this idea? Not to think about only Moscow, but about the whole country. Thanks.
Okay. If I could invite all of our panelists to, thank you very much for the question. If I could invite all of our panelists to give rapid answers actually to all questions, and let me just restate them in my own amateur way. Firstly, I heard a question about how do you really deliver big complex projects and do it really well. Some compliments about London, but London's struggled with this just like many other cities. A question I heard about the impact of property taxes and how to mitigate some of the downside of those tax increases. And then actually a surprisingly generic question. If you went to Germany, you'd hear exactly the same being said about Berlin or Frankfurt growing whilst other cities are depopulating. And Sir Edward, you have a very good analysis, I know, about the differing experience between London and provincial cities in the rest of the UK. So actually that's a surprisingly common feature, that last point about the implications of the growth of the big national city for other cities across the country. So anybody want to take any one of those questions first?
Давайте я попробую я.
Let me try to be the first. I begin from the last question, that is to forbid to build houses in Moscow, real estate, so as the builders who build in Moscow today will go to some other regions to build. I believe that it's not in our country, but in many other countries, this experience proves that no bans, no prohibitions can solve the problems which are based on economic problems. And I think we should not actually think of banning or prohibiting something, but to stimulate the investments into other cities so that they would not have flight of the population from them. And I believe that each one of us in each constituency have our public commitments and obligations. We spoke about that. Say, City of Moscow has public commitments with regard to housing construction for low-income citizens and orphans, and in such situations we are not going to, if you don't build any buildings, how can we meet our public commitments to such categories of people? The second question, talking about shifting or making labor resources cheaper if the taxes grow, and these taxes have been introduced only marginally, and it's trade centers and offices that have to pay such taxes, and they would have areas in excess of 5,000 square meters. These are subject to such taxation, and the installations that do not fall in this category. If you look at the competition that exists in the city proceeding from various systems of taxation, they would not have a possibility to dominate over certain monopolies to create a situation when shifting responsibility from the to reflect on the salaries of various workers in trade centers and in offices. So in that situation, I believe that the tax that we apply today and will apply beginning from 1 January, it will not entail the decrease of wages and salaries.
On the question of making housing move elsewhere, or development of or investments in Moscow to the detriment of the rest of the regions, on that we have a very different experience. The situations are very different in different contexts. In India, small towns are growing faster than big cities. Cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata and Chennai have experienced substantially reduced growth rates in the recent census. It's expected by another 10 years, that is 2021, when we count population again, we might actually see that population no longer grows, and probably in the decade after it might reduce. But the population is moving towards smaller towns. or reasonably sized towns, which are either within the vicinity of the big city or even elsewhere. All the small towns are growing in India. So that requires another level of infrastructure investment. Investment actually has to go elsewhere now. I think it's healthy for a country like India, but I'm not sure how it applies to Moscow.
And let me provoke the Deputy Mayor of London. Sir Edward, is London's growth damaging to the prospects of other UK cities?
I would argue it isn't. Firstly, I don't think you can, as the Deputy Mayor said, go against market forces. Market forces are there. People want to live in the big cities. You can't stop them, and it would be wrong to try, and it won't work. We've tried it in the past, and it's always failed. So what you've got to do is to make sure you build the houses, the infrastructure that you need in that big city. But secondly, and this leads on to the other part of the question, we need to make sure other cities in the country are able to stand up and to create jobs and wealth themselves. And that's about trying to show to people that what's good for one city can also be good for other cities. It's about all cities having vision. It's about those cities looking at where their strengths are and creating the job opportunities within their area of expertise and their strength. And that's something where I think the larger cities can help the others, and we certainly do put a lot of time and effort into that. On property taxes, I understand the frustration and the question that comes from the questioner, but I'm afraid that cities are expensive things to keep going, becoming more expensive to keep going. And actually, if you allow the standards within a city to slip, it will do far more damage to business than the current situation. Businesses need a good environment, and we've got quite a lot of anecdotal evidence that companies will actually pay more to have a good environment around their complexes because it attracts staff and it helps them retain the staff. So I would suggest to you that property taxes are not all negative. They can be very positive if they're spent in the right way.
Thank you very much. Well, it's clear then from the last 90 minutes of discussion that there are two principal themes here. One is that each city is unique and requires its own specific balance between density and sprawl. The second is that each city must innovate and adapt to meet the future market expectations and public expectations too. With that, I'd invite you to thank our three contributors in the traditional way. Can I add my thanks for all of your contributions this afternoon and for being so open to questions? And can I thank you for being so patient and staying so late and asking such good questions? Thank you very much, and I wish you a good evening.